Hello everyone and welcome back to Legacy Larder. I'm Andy and today we are kicking it old school again. We have a recipe for molasses cakes, which are actually cookies, out of a 1920 Royal Baking Powder cookbook. So this is a pretty cool one. I'm excited to try these out. I mean, molasses cakes are as American as baseball or apple pie, but you might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute. Molasses was first documented in a conquest shipping log of the Portuguese back in the late 1500s. And baseball is tracked back to early Britain. And apple pie, well, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote about that in a cookbook back in like 1300 and something. So, you're right, it's a joke. Molasses cakes. Here is the Royal Cookbook from the Royal Baking Powder Company, and these guys were around for quite a while. It's in very excellent condition for the age. See their copyright, 1920, down there on the bottom from the Royal Baking Powder Company. And today we are making molasses cakes. So let's get into it. All right, here we are. Let's begin. We start this recipe off by mixing up some molasses. I've got 1 cup of molasses here. I'm going to put that into a bowl. Molasses, besides being introduced into the American diet quite a while back, Portuguese diet first, I guess, but it was used to make rum. It's a byproduct of sugar creation, and it's actually got some nutrient, some vitamin value. I mean, I wouldn't recommend sitting down and eating a bunch of molasses, but unlike regular sugar, it does have some nutritional value. Okay, 1 cup of molasses. We have half a cup of white sugar next. Mixing these together. Then I have a half a cup of melted shortening. Again, this is vegetable shortening. This is the kind that I choose to use when shortening is called for. I'll use a vegetable shortening. And we have a half a cup of very recently boiled water. The recipe asks for boiling water. This was boiling just a moment ago. So we'll add that in and get these all mixed together. The boiling water probably helps melt everything down. I'm guessing with the sugars more melted, the white sugar especially, the texture of the cookie will be smoother. You know, sometimes you have a cookie and you like crunch on the sugar crystals. I'm guessing that maybe these cookies will not have that, because already I can't feel any sugar crystals in here at all. A little bit, I guess. Not too bad though, considering how much is in there. So that water may help melt those down. Okay, now we have these things together. We're going to add 3 cups of flour. This is just regular flour. Not the bread flour, so regular all-purpose. And I'm going to switch to a better instrument at this point, a wooden spoon. All right, the flour. And then we're going to add to that 3 teaspoons of baking powder. Now, of course, the recipe calls for Royal Company baking powder, but I didn't have that at my store, and I didn't look them up to see if they're actually still in business. I'm curious if they are. We also need a half a teaspoon of baking soda. Then I'll give these just a little bit of a swirl around here. And then we need some salt. I've got a half teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. I like to use the Ceylon cinnamon. It's also known as true cinnamon. It has a lot better flavor, I think, than the store-bought cinnamon. And the Ceylon cinnamon is the one with all the health benefits. So if you're looking to get the benefits from cinnamon, Ceylon is the one you want. It's a little bit more expensive, but boy, the flavor is worth it, I think, if you can pull it off. Okay, so we had 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Now we need a teaspoon each of nutmeg and cloves. So here's our nutmeg, teaspoon of that, and a teaspoon of cloves, ground cloves. All right, once we have these in, I'm gonna mix it all up good. Oh man, those spices together just makes my skin tingle. I love the way those warm spices smell. Now, back in 1919, there was a molasses flood. It was January 5th, 1919, in Boston, and a large tank of molasses ruptured because of pressure, and 2.3 million gallons of molasses raced through the streets. 40-foot high wave of molasses through the streets of Boston. So it was a bad deal. Some people got hurt pretty bad, and I can't even imagine what effort it must have taken to clean up 2.3 million gallons of molasses. I mean, you drip a little bit on your shirt, it's hard to get out. Imagine if, I guess at the time, imagine if your horse is covered with it. A little bit different deal. So this is 1 cup of breadcrumbs. The recipe calls for stale breadcrumbs, but I took them out of a box. I figured that's good enough. I don't know how one would measure the staleness. Probably just dried is what I'm taking that to mean, dried breadcrumbs. So we'll mix these in, the breadcrumbs. I've also never made a cookie recipe that had breadcrumbs in it, so that's kind of an interesting addition. I'm not sure the purpose of that yet, maybe as a moisture holder or just another little texture additive, but we shall see. This is a good thick batter, and those spices smell amazing. It's not too thick to stir by hand, but if you have a stand mixer, this would be a good candidate for that. It might be a little bit too thick for a hand mixer. This is maybe a little bit more than that could handle, but if you've got a good stout spoon or a stand mixer, no problem. Okay, so we are sitting in good shape. That's our batter. That's not too bad. So now we need to grease some cookie sheets and get them in the oven. I think I've mentioned in a previous show that I like to use butter when it comes to greasing pans, and maybe it's just something I'm more familiar with. There are cooking sprays as options. I prefer to use the butter. It seems like a little bit closer to what would have been used at the time, butter or lard, for baking sweets and that sort of thing. Unless lard is specifically called for, I like to stick with the butter. So I'm going to grease up a variety of size pans here so we can cook all of these in one go if we can. When you're greasing a pan with butter, it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just baking cookies, we're not building a piano. So smear a bit on, try not to make it so you're going to end up with a butter swimming pool when your cookies are in there. You don't want deep fried cookies. Well, maybe you do. But this recipe, these particular cookies are not deep fried. The butter warms and softens with the heat of your hand. And ta-da, buttered. We just need to do that a few more times. Another note on butter. A lot of chefs, maybe all chefs, recommend unsalted butter for pretty much anything when you're baking or cooking. And it's for good reason, so you can control the amount of salt in your recipe. You have tighter control over that. Because your butter is unsalted, then you know that when you put in that half teaspoon of salt, that's all the salt you're getting. You don't have to also adjust for extra salt that was in the butter. And the amount of salt in butter probably varies by brand, of course by the amount of butter that you're using in a particular recipe. So I usually just use salted butter unless a recipe turns out poorly. Then I'll change and either reduce the amount of salt that was added or do something different, use unsalted butter. But typically I just use salted butter for everything. Okay, these are now buttered up. Let's get some cookies on them. For this cookie recipe, I'm going to use my handy dandy scooper again, so we have equal sized cookies, and we can find repeated success if these turned out well. Okay, using my cookie scooper, the recipe asks to just drop them by spoonfuls onto a greased baking sheet, and then we're going to cook them in a moderate oven. A moderate oven is about 350 degrees. It ranges between 325 and 375 is what you would consider moderate. So, or at least what the old timers considered moderate back at this point in the cooking game. So I've got the oven preheated to 350. I'm gonna load up some sheets here and we'll get these babies popped in. 1. 2. 'This dough is a bit sticky, and I think it would probably have been not a bad idea to refrigerate this, just like we did for the icebox honey, or the honey icebox cookies, just to stiffen up the dough a bit and make it a little easier to work with, because this is a bit sticky coming out of my little scooper. Three pans. All right, we're a little short on this one, so see, I've got enough room for 5 more, but of course my smaller pans are holding 6. So I don't want to cook one cookie on one pan. So let's get them into the oven and bake them up. We're cooking in a moderate oven again, which I'm counting as 350 degrees. And we're going to put them in there for 10 to 12 minutes. That's what the recipe asks for. Okay, here's 12 minutes. Let's take a look. Pull one of these out. Oh boy. Man, they look really good. That's 12 minutes. This is still very, very soft. I think I'm gonna put them in for a couple more minutes because maybe my scooper is a bit too big. It did say to drop it by spoonfuls onto the pan. The scooper is probably too big for the recipe, so we're going to cook them a little bit longer. All right, everybody. I feel good about this one. Let's pull them on out. See what we've got. Oh, these look and smell absolutely delicious. There's our wimpy pan. This smells pretty dreamy, folks. These look delicious. I'll get you in for an extreme close-up at these little beautiful things. So you can see the breadcrumbs. The white specks are the breadcrumbs that are we mixed into the cookie batter, and they're browned nicely. They've got a little bit of a squish to them because they just came out, but they had baking soda and baking powder. Of course, lots of that Royal Baking Powder Company baking powder in there, so they're going to be a little bit cakey, which is why they're called molasses cakes, I suppose. But they look great. So let me get them onto some cooling racks and let's see what they taste like. The cookies have sat on the pans for a couple minutes, so I think they're okay to take off of the cookie sheets and put onto some cooling racks now. So I'm again going to use my offset spatula, scrape underneath these little guys. Oh, they actually come up really nicely with the greased cookie sheet. So get these picked off and put onto our cooling rack, and then give it a taste. They sure smell nice. There we go. So here are our molasses cakes. They look really good. They smell amazing. I like the texture. Just, they look great. So let's give one a shot. Yeah, nicely browned on the bottom. The breadcrumbs you can see poking out here and there through the batter. So let's break one open and see what it looks like inside. Okay. Oh, light and cakey. Nice crumb. That looks delicious. Yeah, it's done, but not dried out. It's very moist on the inside. This looks really, really good. Well, let's give it a taste and see how we did here. Yeah, the shell of the cookie is a bit crispy and harder. The inside is cakey and light. The molasses and those warm winter spices are great. It tastes like a gingerbread cookie, but soft and chewy and incredible. Now this is definitely a keeper. There's a little bit of salt, a little bit of warm spice. This is definitely one to have in your arsenal for sure, especially around the holidays. This would be a total hit around Christmas time. And no reason to have them. They're from 1920. I mean, come on. Who's got this recipe? You do now. Yeah, these are good. Definitely a keeper. I have to have this one too. The Royal Baking Powder Company, 1920 cookbook. Molasses cakes. These are all right. This is a good recipe. They're crispy on the outside, fluffy and cakey in the middle. They taste like a bite out of Christmas. So I'll have the recipe at the end. Give them a shot. Tell me what you think. My name is Andy. This is Legacy Larder. Thanks very much for joining me again, and I hope to see you again soon.